All right, this is Sensation and Perception, Section B lecture. Our prioritized standard is going to be 5B, and objectively we're going to analyze the visual, sensory, and auditory sensory systems. The visual system is determined by the eye's ability to extract the information from light waves, which are simply a form of electromagnetic energy. So the visible light that we can see with our eye is not going to be fundamentally different from radio waves or X-rays for that matter, but it's just what our eye is capable of seeing. Now, vision begins with light entering the interior of the eye through the pupil, which is impacted by the iris, which is the colored part of your eye, that can change how much light enters the eye. In dim light, the pupil gets larger or dilates, and in bright light, the pupil gets smaller or constricts. The iris also helps focus an image. Behind the iris is going to be the lens that helps the focusing process further, and the cornea that focuses most of the light coming into the eye. So the cornea actually protects the eye as it is the clear membrane covering the surface of the eye. Many visual problems that people have actually to do with the shape of the cornea, not necessarily the rest of the eye, but it's usually more the cornea that's actually causing that issue to happen. So procedures like LASIK vision correction will make incisions into the cornea to actually change the focus of the eye, just in case you didn't know. Now, the eye transduces the characteristics of light into neural signals that the brain can process in the retina. The retina is a thin, light-sensitive layer at the back of the eyeball that contains millions of photoreceptors and other types of nerve cells. Every eye also has a blind spot, where any stimulus that falls on this area cannot actually be seen. So the blind spot is the point where the optic nerve actually exits the eye, and there are actually no photoreceptors in that location. With normal vision, blindness is not actually experienced because of this, because what one eye misses is actually going to be registered by the other eye, and your brain actually fills in the spot with the information that matches the background. So for instance, if you wanted to try to use this as an example to try to test your blind spot, what you would do is you would focus your attention on this with your right eye closed. So you close your right eye, you look at this with your left eye. And then if you actually bring your Chromebook slowly to you, at some point over here, this circle will actually go away. It'll be filled in the rest of the way. So that is a way you can actually test to see where your blind spot actually would be at. Now, photoreceptors are light-sensitive neurons in the retina that convert light energy into electrical impulses. So the photoreceptors are as far as the light actually gets into the visual system. Now, rods are actually specialized photoreceptors in the retina that are responsible for non-color sensitivity to low levels of light, allowing people to see in dim light and darkness. So due to the rods, people are capable of seeing in the dark. There's about 125 million tiny rods in the retina, and also, as the name might suggest, these are going to be rod-shaped. So the ones that are more rod-shaped are going to be the rods. Oh, clever. Now, cones, these are the specialized photoreceptors in the retina that are responsible for color vision and actually the sharpness of a vision. So each cone is specialized to detect the light waves we sense as either blue, red, or green. And then there are about 7 million cones coming into play in bright light. So as the name's going to suggest, these are the ones that look more cone-shaped. So like this one would be a cone. So again, rods is seeing in the dark, and cones is color. Now, when the visual cortex receives the neural messages from the eyes via the optic nerve, it is transformed into various visual sensations, like the sensation of color, form, boundary, and movement, as per instances. Now, the psychological sensation of brightness is actually caused by the intensity or the amplitude of light waves. So for instance, approaching headlights have much more intense light waves than the relatively dim light of a car's instrument panel, as for instance, which actually gives the sensations of the headlights being brighter than the other types of light that might actually just be in your car. Now, the psychological sensation of color or hue is caused by variations of the wavelength of the visible light. So the world is actually colorless, but it's actually the brain that actually creates the sensation of color. So humans are actually capable of discriminating about 5 million different hues, so different shades of the different colors that we are accustomed to. Now, long wavelengths are actually found at the red end of the visual spectrum, while shorter wavelengths are found at the blue end of the spectrum. So basically the colors of the rainbow, RGB, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. This actually demonstrates the order of the colors in order from the longest wavelength to the shortest wavelength. So red has the longest, the violet has the least, shortest rather. Now light is actually pure energy, and eyes can only detect the a special form of energy referred to as visible light, which takes up only a tiny segment of the vast electromagnetic spectrum. So the entire range of electromagnetic energy includes things like radio waves, X-rays, microwaves, and visible light is just one part of it. So this basically shows you the different types of light energy there actually is, but we can only see this particular type of light. Now, the tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum to which human eyes are actually sensitive is what we just call the visual spectrum, or just the visual light. In order for humans to access other portions of the electromagnetic spectrum, we must employ special detection instruments. So things like radios, TVs, this can actually help us convert that type of energy into something that would actually be visible for us. Our visual sensations of color actually form position, color, form, position, also depth for that matter, are all based on the processing of the same stream of sensory information in different parts of our visual cortex. Now, there are actually two theories explaining the sensation of colors. The first of those is the trichromatic theory, which says that colors are sensed by 3 different types of cones in the retina that are sensitive to light, which would be red, blue, and green wavelengths. So basically, if you combine this blue and this green, you'd be able to see this color. You combine the blue and the red, you can see these colors. You combine the green and the red, you can see these colors. And if you combine all of them at the same time, that's what we see as white. And there's also another one that's called the opponent process theory, which says that cells in the visual system process colors in complementary pairs. Now, the opponent process theory says that there are actually 3 receptor complexes. We have the red-green complex, the yellow-blue complex, and also the black and white complex. Now, according to this theory, these cells can only detect the presence of one color at a time in receptor complexes because the 2 colors actually oppose one another. So, for instance, you ever notice you've never seen a greenish red before? So this theory would suggest that the opponent cells only allow you to detect one of those colors at a time. So you can't see like shades of these 2. While the trichromatic theory explains the earliest stages of color sensation, the opponent process theory is actually better at explaining things like after images and color blindness. All right, so if you want to see an example of after images, stare right here in the middle of this inverted flag and let me read, and then I will show you. So after images, these are visual sensations lingering after stimuli are removed, often as negative after images appearing in reversed colors. So I've been looking, and if I go to this white one, your eyes will probably flash the colors of the flag in the traditional red, white, and blue. Now, something else that is explained by this trichromatic theory is color blindness, which is typically a genetic disorder, although sometimes it can actually result from trauma. Color blindness, this actually prevents an individual from discriminating certain colors. So the most common form is actually going to be a red-green color blindness, where either you can see red, either the red or the green cones are going to not be working. So you could see potentially one, but not both. So this is generally a test to see if you are colorblind. So if you are colorblind, you probably can't tell that there's a number in this, or you cannot tell that there's a number in this. So if you are not colorblind, you can probably see an 8 and a 96. But if you were colorblind, you wouldn't be able to make any distinction because only the cones for the green or the red would actually be working in that instance. There's other types of color blindness, but this is the most common. The gene for color deficient vision is more recessive, so it's not a dominant trait. And again, this is one type of test. So if you don't see an 8 or a 96, you might actually be colorblind. The hearing system is determined by the ear's ability to extract information from sound waves. There are two physical properties of any sound wave that determines how much will be sensed by the brain, and that includes frequency and amplitude. So the frequency is the number of vibrations or cycles completed by a wave in a given amount of time. Usually they measure that over the course of seconds. And a lot of times it's expressed as cycles per second or possibly hertz. Now the amplitude, this is the physical strength of a wave. So amplitude is usually measured from the peak to the valley, so top to the bottom, on a graph of the wave. It is defined in units of sound pressure or energy. So when you're turning down the volume on a stereo, you're actually decreasing the amplitude of the sound waves. So again, here are the different structures of the eye. The psychological sensation of sound requires that sound waves are transduced into impulses sent to the brain, which actually happens in 4 steps. First, the airborne sound waves must be relayed to the inner ear. The vibrating waves of air enter the outer ear and then strike the eardrum. Next, the cochlear, which is the primary organ of hearing, focuses the vibrations of the basilar membrane. And then the basilar membrane, which is a thin strip of tissue sensitive to vibrations in the cochlear, apologies if I'm ruining these pronunciations, converts vibrations into neural messages. So the basilar membrane contains hair cells that are connected to hair cells, and when a sound wave causes the hair cells to vibrate, the associated neurons become excited and are then converted into nerve activity. And then finally, the neural messages will travel to the auditory cortex, that's in the brain. So the neural signals leave the cochlear through the auditory nerve of both ears. They meet at the brain stem, then eventually arrive in the auditory cortex, where the higher order processing will take place. Sounds have 3 sensory qualities: pitch, loudness, and timbre. Pitch is a sensory characteristic of sound produced by the frequency of sound waves, with high frequencies producing high-pitched sounds and low frequencies producing low-pitched sounds. Now, human sensitivity to sound is limited to frequencies as low as about 20 cycles per second to frequencies as high as 20,000 cycles per second. Dogs can actually hear much higher frequencies than humans. Elephants can hear much lower frequencies than humans. So that just happens to be the range of humans to pitch. Now, loudness is a sensory characteristic of sound produced by the amplitude or intensity of the sound wave. So more intense sound waves, like a shout, produce louder sounds, while less intense sound waves, like a whisper, produce softer sounds. So sound intensity is going to be measured usually in decibels. Timbre is a complex quality of a sound wave that makes them distinctive from other sounds. So this is how you're able to distinguish between the sound of your parent's voice compared to the sound of your friend's voice. Distinguish between the sound of a piano compared to the sound of a guitar. The voice of Mr. Booth compared to the voice of Mr. Nivens. So just that special little quality where you can tell the difference based on other things, even if the pitch or the loudness was about the same. Now, when people have deafness, it is usually one of two types: conduction deafness or nerve deafness. Now, conduction deafness is an inability to hear resulting from damage to structures of the middle or inner ear. Sometimes it can be caused by being blocked by earwax or a foreign object that's in the ear canal. This is most common in children who have recurrent ear infections or inserted foreign objects into their ear canal. This may be reversible through medical or surgical types of interventions. Now, nerve deafness, which you can see is sometimes called sensorineural, is an inability to hear linked to a deficit in the body's ability to transmit impulses from the cochlear to the brain. So the most common type of hearing loss here, this is the most common type of hearing loss just in general, is going to usually come from nerve deafness. It can result from effects of aging, exposure to a loud noise, so if you like listen to your headphones too loud, as for instance, injury, disease, certain types of drugs, possibly even inherited conditions. Now, this type usually is not something that can be medically or surgically treated, although use of hearing aids can actually be beneficial for nerve types of deafness. Now, the vision and hearing systems have been studied more than the other senses, which is why we talk so much about them. But the other senses play a large role in our survival and our well-being that are dependent on the other senses also. Now, the olfactory system is the sensory system where odors in the form of airborne chemical molecules are transduced into the sensation of smell. Now, the olfactory bulbs are the areas of the brain located just above the sinus cavity. There they are. And just below the frontal lobes that receive information from the olfactory receptor cells that are in the nose. Now, there's at least 1,000 olfactory receptors, and olfaction, if you didn't know, is just another way of saying smell. Now, the sense of smell has a connection with memory, as certain smells can actually evoke emotion-laden memories. Perhaps smelling a perfume might remind you of someone from your past that used that perfume. Personally, whenever I smell crayons, it actually makes me think of elementary school. Now, smell actually remains a major factor in survival, as it actually helps us detect and avoid potential sources of danger. So like if you smell like decaying food or the smell of smoke, that can usually be a signal that, you need to get out of here, or don't eat that food. Now, pheromones are actually chemical signals released by some organisms to communicate with other members of their species. Now, pheromones can actually signal sexual receptivity, danger, territorial boundaries, and food sources. Although it's actually unclear to the extent of which pheromones are used in humans, newer research does support the idea that pheromones in humans are actually beneficial in sexual attraction. All right, probably going to butcher this one. The gustatory system is the sensory system partially responsible for the sensation of taste. I know what I said partially. There are actually 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is a newer identified taste that's actually associated with savory taste that you would find in things like broths and other types of cooked meats. Now, taste buds are taste receptors that are going to be in your mouth, mostly on the top and side of the tongue, although as this shows, different types of taste are noticed in different types of parts of the tongue, rather. So again, these taste buds are taste receptors in the mouth that sample the molecules in our food and our drink. So those with more taste buds are going to probably notice bitter flavors more noticeably. They're going to be known as super tasters. And then some people are going to be extreme non-tasters, and they're not going to be as receptive to bitter taste, as a for instance. Uh, so super tasters, they often have a distaste for certain types of foods, stuff like broccoli or diet drinks. They might notice these as being more bitter than people who are not super tasters, as for instance. Now, the sense of taste works cooperatively with the olfactory system's sense of smell. For instance, much of the taste of an onion is actually odor and not flavor. Also, when someone has a cold or COVID now, uh, this can actually make food seem tasteless because your nasal passages are blocked and then you actually can't smell the food. Now, the somaesthetic sense systems are the body system or body senses rather, consisting of the skin sense, the kinesthetic sense, and the vestibular sense. Now, soma means body, aesthetic means feeling. So, body feeling, basically what that means. Now, the kinesthetic senses are the senses of body position and movement of body parts relative to each other. So, this actually makes you aware when your body parts, where your body parts are in relation to each other, which is helpful when you're trying to do things like walking or running, when your legs are crossed, when you're deciding which hand to grab something with. This processing usually happens unconsciously, except when deliberately learning the movements of a new physical skill. Like when you're learning to play a musical instrument, you have to really think about what you're doing with your body parts. But once you've learned how to play that instrument, you're really not thinking about it consciously. Now, the vestibular senses are the senses of body orientation with respect to gravity. Now, this has to do with our bodies knowing how they are postured, whether straight, leaning, reclining, or upside down. This tells us when we are moving and when we are not. Uh, this has much to do with the inner ear. So, like if you're familiar with the term equilibrium, this is the system dealing with equilibrium or your balance. So if you mess up your equilibrium balance system, yeah, that's not going to be an awesome thing. Now, the skin senses are the sensations of touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. The skin sensitivity varies tremendously over the body due to some areas having more receptors than others. For instance, there's a lot more skin receptors in our faces and tongues and hands, which are going to be a lot more sensitive than other parts of our body. The fingertips are actually going to be about 10 times more accurate in sensing stimulation than stimulation on our back, as a for instance. So if somebody touches your hand, you can feel that very quickly. If somebody taps your back, you could actually be a while before you might actually notice that. Touch is also going to be vital for healthy mental and physical development, as the lack of touch stimulation can actually stunt mental and motor development. All right, that was Sensation and Perception, Section B lecture. Sorry for butchering several words on that one. Our prioritized standards was 5B, and objectively now I can analyze the visual, sensory, and auditory sensory systems.